We are winding down the year. This is our final episode of season 1. To close things out, we have compiled some clips from a few of our most listened to episodes. Probably not surprising, each of these clips has to do with the power of your mind and your ability to create your ideal reality. We start with an episode about your brain and how to use it to achieve your dreams. To help us fully understand how to work with our brains to get what we want in life, or to just make things more enjoyable, less stressful, I brought on Dr. Haley Nelson, a neuroscientist and faculty member at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Haley has this uncanny ability to break neuroscience into layman's terms and explains just how our brains shape our reality. Then the second clip is from the most listened to episode of the entire show. It's about the neuroscience behind our words and how we often aren't even aware of what we are saying. It's become just so habitual. But those words hold a tremendous power in what we are experiencing in our lives. And then the final clip is from the series I did on goal achieving. It was the most listened to episode in that series, probably because, like the others, it's all about making your dreams your reality, and specifically how to get what you say you want in life. Here are the clips from all 3 of those episodes. Welcome to Shift or Get Off the Pot, the podcast that helps you get out of your head and into action so you can make your dreams your reality. Let's get to it.
When I was starting out with my business, people were saying, oh, you have to do personal and professional development. You have to change your mind in order to have growth in your business or to have growth in your career. Yeah. And I was one of those people who's like, no, I don't. I just have to do the work. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to change my mindset. I don't need to become a better person in order to be a better professor or to be a better researcher, right? And so I was definitely hesitant, thinking, oh, that's all woo-woo, right? That's just these gurus saying, do this, do that, meditate, blah, blah, blah. But then now using these tools of neuroscience, we can actually see the changes in the structure and the function of our brain. And so we now know through research that it isn't just woo-woo, that there is hardcore scientific evidence supporting this idea of mindset and breathing routines and meditation and yoga practices and getting outside and grounding ourselves and, being out in nature, that there's actual scientific evidence to show that it helps. And we can look at it from a chemical standpoint, looking at different hormones, looking at different neurotransmitters, and we can also look at it from neuroimaging studies and see different brain activations and different connections that can happen over time and through practice, that it really does change not only the physical structure of the brain, but how it works, how it functions. And this idea of neuroplasticity, that our brains are plastic, that we can change them through repetition, right? Doing these, if you just meditate once, that's not going to do anything. Maybe it'll make you feel good for, that hour or the rest of that day. But to really have change in your life and have that mindset shift, you have to rewire your brain. And we now know that that is possible.
It's putting in the reps, isn't it? It's not just a one and done. It's continuously showing up. It's like a muscle. What I found, it's like a muscle. And I'm just so excited that things have changed and that people are now seeing that it's not just this, woo woo, crazy, blah, blah, blah type of thing, that there is some scientific evidence that now backs it, because my background is in sales and in sales training. And then I owned a franchise in the personal development space because I understood that business development and personal development go hand in hand, and they really do, because it's a direct reflection, right, of who you are and what your thoughts are and how you're showing up for yourself. And so I like that you said that, because that's so important. But I learned a lot about that early on. I read Maxwell Maltz, and you probably are familiar with his study where, he altered the appearance of people, but then they would come back several weeks later, because even though their outward appearance was changed, they hadn't changed their belief about what they looked like. And so I think what you're really saying is that it's just if we can change our both ways, because you alluded to that earlier. You said that it kind of works both ways, that if we can change the way we think about something, it then starts to change the decisions we make, right? And then the actions that we're taking, the results that we get.
Yeah. And sometimes for some people, they respond better for just doing the action, right? Start with the behavior, and certain behaviors can boost different chemicals, for example, that can ramp up neuroplasticity and kind of make it easier for you. And then the mindset shift comes later. Sometimes people need to focus on just reading the book and not doing necessarily actionable things, but more cognitive things and thinking about it, that can then change the brain, and then that can change the body and the behavior. So the beautiful thing is, there is no cookie cutter way to do this. We are all so unique. Our brains are so unique. There's upwards of 80 to 100 billion neurons in the average adult human brain. And each one of those upwards of 100 billion neurons has 10,000 connections with other neurons. It's infinite number of possibilities and ways that each one of us, even genetically identical twins, can respond differently and react differently. And so because we're so unique, we need to have a unique way to be able to allow it to help us. Now, of course, there are more tried and true methods that have been shown through research and through experience that are more effective and can help you get there quicker. And of course, I'm one of those people. It's like, I don't want to spend years working on this. I want actionable results right here and now. So yes, I'm going to listen to the science and see, okay, if I incorporate exercise, if I incorporate breathing routines, if I do this repetition, if I get those, a boost of dopamine as I'm trying to build new habits, I can facilitate this process even faster so that I can see results faster, and therefore have more of that permanent change that we're all seeking.
Yeah, that permanent change, because that's really what the key is, isn't it? It's kind of like you want this, and yet you take a few steps forward, but then boom, it's kind of like you're holding back. And why do you think that is, though? Is it just that because we have this self-doubt, is that we have these stories that we're telling ourselves, the self-sabotage, the fear of success, failure, whatever it is? Is it just this, I almost liken it to like this inner script or dialogue that's just been running in the back of our minds forever? Why do you think that we just hang on to that stuff, though?
It's easier. Right? Yeah. It served a purpose for us at some point in our life, having that self-doubt, thinking small, being that quiet person who didn't maybe necessarily push themselves. At some point in our life, it served us, right? There must have been something that happened in childhood or in adolescence, or even, a few years earlier, that it created this pathway in our brain that became automatic. Our nervous system is all about automation. It wants to do things as quickly as possible in order to save us. It has a survival, adaptable response, right? Whether it's a bear charging towards us, or it's, that career advancement that you're reaching for. Either way, that's a stimulus in our environment, and our nervous system is set up to recognize it and to act and respond immediately without having to think and make decisions. Every single choice that we make, we need to automate things. So what happens is, through practice, as we continue to exhibit those behaviors or thoughts, the more we do it, the stronger those connections become. And so it's like the stream running down a hill. It's just going to go along the path of least resistance. The water is not going to go up the mountain, right? You need to have some kind of a pump or some system to get it to go up. It's going to just follow gravity, go down along the path of least resistance. And now all of a sudden, here comes you, right? Saying, okay, well, we need to change our mindset. We need to make these changes in our life. And then you're going to hit that resistance. That's basically asking that river, that stream to start flowing up the mountain. And it doesn't want to do that. It wants to do what it's always done because it's been the easiest, most adaptable response up until that point. But then when you make that decision that, hey, this no longer serves me, and sure, maybe it's something that is automated, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Right? Mm-hmm. These can be bad habits that become automated. And so to change them, you're going to have that resistance. So there's different tricks and tools to make that resistance a little bit less powerful so that you can now start repeating these other thoughts and these other actions to allow neuroplasticity to occur, to allow that brain and those connections to actually form so that those become the new automated and automatic thoughts and behaviors. So it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to get that resistance. And again, at some point it had a survival value. Yeah. Right. And that's why we have it. And then now you're trying to teach your brain, no longer does this serve me to survive. I need to make this change. And then you have to put in the work once you've made that decision to now create this new pathway, the new wiring in your brain to say, no, this is what is really going to serve me. And over time and through repetition, it can, in most cases, actually make that change so that that can be the automatic response. And so instead of having those negative self-talk and the negative self-esteem, now you'll start having positive affirmations and things that are going to motivate you and help push you forward instead of holding you back.
I like the idea of the fast track, right? It's kind of like, let's get into action, let's move forward and let's get it done. And I'm not one to look at things and say, oh my gosh, I have to go all the way back to my early childhood and figure out why all this happened, right? And I want to know, well, there's a couple of things that you said right there that I want to delve into a little bit further. But number one is you mentioned that there are certain tips and tricks that you can use to help yourself to then start creating these new neural pathways. So what are some of those tips and tricks?
So first, we've mentioned it, repetition, right? So things, we have to do them, whether you like them or not. So there's things that you can do to make it more enjoyable. And when I say enjoyable, I'm referring to dopamine, right? So I love neurotransmitters. Dopamine is my favorite neurotransmitter. That's what I studied for my PhD work. And so to help motivate people, you need that dopamine release. And we can get that through things that are pleasurable. So breaking tasks down into smaller, manageable pieces or chunking them to allow us to continually get these dopamine releases to reward us is going to make that big dreaded, task seem much more manageable. I mean, if you wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon, you don't just decide that when you're 50 pounds overweight and haven't put on running, you don't even own running shoes, right? You have to start small. And so you go research and you buy those running shoes and you reward yourself with that. And then you start small, you run maybe a mile one day. I'm not a runner, so I don't really know how the training would go for that. But you don't just get up and run 26 and change miles in one day. You have to work up to it. And so I think that's the first thing, is being able to give yourself the little boosts of dopamine every once in a while to keep you motivated, to keep you engaged and wanting to continue so that you continue to have that repetition. So you need to have repetition. And then, that one trick is to give you the dopamine to get there. Another really important chemical that is recently been shown to improve neuroplasticity is a chemical, the acronym is BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And we've known this chemical exists for a very long time, but we didn't really understand this idea and concept of how it can actually help facilitate neuroplasticity. And this chemical is actually released when we exercise. So through aerobic activity, you can release BDNF from our muscles, and then our brain is able to activate it. And what it does is it serves as a neuroprotective factor. So it's going to prevent our cells from damage. So it's going to prevent the cells from dying. And it's going to help facilitate that neuroplasticity. So when I'm talking about neuroplasticity, there's actually, if you have one neuron here and one neuron here, and there's a connection, but now all of a sudden we want to get rid of this connection and create a connection up here, neuroplasticity is actually creating that new connection, that new synaptic integration is what we call it, to create these new synapses and connections. And BDNF can help facilitate that that new synaptic integration. So even if your big end goal has nothing to do with physical activity, I use the example of running a marathon. If it has nothing to do with that, still, if you can incorporate physical activity, especially aerobic activity, into your day, you're going to help make that neuroplastic change actually easier because you're facilitating that process. So repetition, and then also adding the BDNF if you can, adding the dopamine in different pieces when you can. And then the last bit of advice is to tie emotion to it. So we have evolved as humans to have emotions, right? If you look at our great ancestors, and even you look at a rat or a camel, I don't care, pick an animal, they don't necessarily have emotions. They're not laughing, they're not crying, right? They'll show fear. There's certain emotions that are ingrained, and has been conserved through evolution. But a lot of what makes humans human is this idea of that we have emotions. And so let's say your goal is to, lose 50 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever it is. Instead of just saying, oh, I want to do it so I can have a better bikini body by summertime, that's not really tying an emotion to it. But if you say, I want to lose that weight so that I can have more energy to be present with my kids, so that I'm not winded when I'm chasing after the soccer ball when I'm outside playing with my kids, or I want to improve my health so that I can be there at their high school graduation and be present, or walk them down the aisle when they're getting married, whatever it is, and how does that make you feel, right? Tying that emotion to that end goal. I want this promotion at work because it's going to give me more money. That's, kind of surface level. But then what can you do with that money? I can spend more time with my family taking these vacations. And what's that going to feel like when I get to experience these different cultures through my children's eyes? And, really tying that emotional piece and that emotional component to it allows for that repetition, the dopamine release to be that much stronger, so that it facilitates that neuroplasticity even more. So emotion, repetition, if you can incorporate dopamine, and then of course BDNF, those are my take-home tips to really try to help boost that neuroplasticity.
3 great tips. Great tips. Is the BDNF the same as like endorphins?
No, so the endorphins are another fantastic hormone or neurochemical. So endorphins like adrenaline, norepinephrine, these are released. They're also pleasurable chemicals, right? So they feel good and they're rewarding. So with endorphins, they're released actually as part of the stress response is one way, and to alleviate pain. So there are natural opiates, right? And they feel good. I mean, heroin feels good. Otherwise it wouldn't be so addictive, right? Those are opiates. And so we naturally create these opiates that can be released. And one of the catch-22 about endorphins is that because they feel so good and because they can lead to addiction, sometimes self-defeating, painful behaviors and thoughts can end up becoming addictive. Because you're hurting yourself, whether emotionally, and our brain can't really distinguish between emotional pain or physical pain. Breaking your leg changes and it creates the same chemical reaction and activity in our brain as breaking up with your boyfriend or being broken up with, right? Or a loss of a loved one. We see the same brain activity for both physical pain and emotional pain, and endorphins are released to alleviate that pain. And so what can end up happening in certain individuals, we can see that this reward pathway and everything kind of gets activated, and it can lead to addiction-like tendencies. And sometimes it makes it that much harder to stop certain habits, some self-sabotaging behaviors and thoughts, because not only is it something that is automated and, your brain has been doing that forever, it seems like, but it's also an addiction. And, and I'm using that term loosely, right. But we can see that it activates the same circuitry and the same neurochemicals. So it makes it that much harder to then change that behavior. And those thoughts as well. So when I say behavior, I also am including our cognition, our thoughts as well, because that is a behavior. So it in some ways can be very good. It can help facilitate new positive habits, but it can also make it harder to break some of those old habits that have served us. And by serving us means that it released some of those opiates. It made us feel better when we did some of those self-sabotaging behaviors that now, it's not necessarily helping us anymore. Procrastination is a great example of that. And I'm guilty of it, right? Just little behaviors like that. I'm addicted to procrastination. Why? Well, it makes me more stressed out when I have a tight deadline and I wait until the last minute to get it done. And if I'm stressed out, guess what's part of that stress response? The endorphin release, right? And so certain behaviors like that can almost become addictive, and then it makes it that much harder to change.
I think it's fascinating that there is really, the brain cannot differentiate between the physical or the emotional abuse. I think I have always found that to be fascinating. And in that, I think are the seeds to be able to now change and flip that into what you truly want. And so I kind of want to take what you just said and bring it back to something you were talking about earlier. And that was about making a decision to change. Because when you have somebody that's, if somebody is, let's say, engaged in self-destructive behavior, and again, it doesn't have to be this horrible addictive behavior, like cutting yourself or something, but it's, let's say it is something like perfectionism, busy work, procrastination. You know that you have a deadline, but you just wait until the 11th hour, right? Okay. Where does, and a part of me has this vision of you with this white lab coat on, and putting all these little...
I'll have to send you some pictures of me in my white lab coat.
Truthfully, though, kind of like, okay, let me see what's going on here. Where's this? What part of the brain is this activating? But how does decision take place? Like, what's the thing that kind of is fueling the decision to make somebody say, enough? Because you kind of hear this with people that have addictive behaviors, or like alcoholics, like everybody has a bottom, right?
Yeah.
So is there something, or will we have the ability to help maybe shorten that bottom so that people can make a decision faster, so that they don't have to go through destructive behavior?
So I think you need to go on and study for your PhD and start doing this kind of research, because it is being done. So, there's decision making is a whole field in neuroscience, and they're using animal models with mice and rats so they can actually look at the genetics, but then even monkeys. I was actually, part of my work for my PhD work was working in a monkey lab where these monkeys were making decisions. And, do you go for that immediate reward, the small reward right away, or can you hold off and wait for a bigger reward later, right? And then at what point does your decision switch? Right? You can hold out, and then eventually you're just like, screw it, give me that candy bar instead of waiting till the end of the month for a big piece of cake and a party, right? At what point, and a lot of that has to do with the value of what it is that you're making the decision on, because there's always going to be two choices at least, right? So what is that incentive value or the motivation behind it? And all of these things have to do with dopamine, right? That's not the only thing that it has to do with, but dopamine stamps in that incentive reward value for your choices, for the decisions that you make. I use the example of, let's say you're going through the grocery store and you see brown bruised bananas, or you see these bright, beautiful yellow bananas. Which ones are you going to pick? And pretty much everybody, unless you're making a banana bread, is going to pick the beautiful yellow, fresh bananas. And that was a choice that you made because dopamine stamped in that, hey, this yellow color and these fresh bananas taste better. They have a more rewarding value to them. And dopamine stamped that in. So you don't have to think about it when you're in the grocery store. You just automatically do that. And so what we need to do when you're talking about behavioral change is figure out, how can I increase that motivational and rewarding value of this choice? And that's where emotions can come into play, right? Where I was talking about, just saying you want to get that promotion at work to make more money is not as motivating as, I want to get this promotion at work so that I can give for my family more, so that I can provide, or maybe I can give back to the community more. Whatever it is that's going to motivate you, you increase the value of that decision to allow you to make that choice, right? And so that's, again, there's so many different avenues that you can go when you're talking about decision making. And then there's this whole economics portion of it, and like actually looking at how you value one thing, and then there's the cost benefit analysis. I mean, it's huge. I mean, you can study this and never even talk to another human being. You're just looking at, graphs and charts and algorithms, and you're just sitting in front of a computer and investigating and asking these questions. But from a behavioral neuroscience perspective, when you're talking about what is it that's going to actually get you to make that choice, it's because dopamine put a value to that choice, and then that becomes what you're going to work harder for. So whatever it is that you value is what you're going to work harder to achieve, if that makes sense. So sometimes people have to do a values audit and sit back and think, well, what is it that I'm valuing more in my life? What is it that is most important to me? And then how am I showing up in my life? Where is that disconnect? Right. And then so sometimes there's wheel of life exercises, for example, that I sometimes work with people and I provide for my students to just kind of practice and say, okay, what are my values? And then how am I actually showing up in this world? Where is that disconnect? Where am I succeeding? And celebrate those successes. But where are areas that are causing extra stress in my life that I might not have even recognized? And then start there. Start with those topics to then be able to start with those small decisions to be able to make yourself more in line with your true values. And sometimes you have to shift. Sometimes you might say, oh, I value money and my career way more than I should. And I'm showing up at work more than I am for my family, but I should be, and I don't want to say should because I don't like shoulding on people. But there's some times where your values is you'll almost look back and say, where did I fall off the wagon? Where did my values shift? And then so doing, it's just an audit of your value system. If we take, if companies do quarterly statements and audit their business every quarter, why aren't we doing that for our own personal development and lifestyle as well? And I think that we should, so that we can make sure that we are in alignment.
Well, I think self-awareness is absolutely key because it's the thing that allows us to really understand, what do I really want? Not just what do I say I want, because there often is a disconnect between what you say you want and the actions that you're taking and what you're doing and the decisions that you're making. But one of the things that you just mentioned then is really the emotion. And when you're just giving the example of, okay, let's say somebody is spending more time at work and they're chasing the money and they're spending all that time there and they're realizing that their values are a little bit off kilter here. They're getting a dopamine hit though, right? Because they're getting a dopamine hit or something that is kind of keeping them in that area in almost, would you call it like a habit loop?
Yeah. I mean, they're in that habit, and at some point it served them, that it was giving them that dopamine. And then every single time you do it, your brain is naturally going to release dopamine because it's rewarding you to continue to do those behaviors. But then when you want to change it, that's where you're going to have that resistance. So, and then you're not going to get the dopamine when you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, or should be doing. Again, using the terms that I don't like to use, but then all of a sudden you're trying to change it. And sometimes you have to take those baby steps and say, instead of putting in 60 hours on my business or at work, I'm just going to, cut it down by 5 hours a week, just so I can be more present at home, or, just do a little bit at a time. You can't just go from 60 hours a week to 40 hours a week. That will hurt, right? That will actually cause more pain and won't be productive. And you might have some resentment towards making that decision. So it's that chunking that behavior, breaking it down, finding other ways to get that dopamine hit to replace what you have. Create a new addiction that's a healthier addiction than
get a reward. Give yourself a reward somewhere in there. Today, we're going to do something here that's going to help you to get past all that mental chatter, all that blah, blah, blah in your head that is just sitting back there and kind of running the show. I learned this method from my oldest son, Brett's first grade teacher. And oh boy, I will tell you that, first of all, when I found out that he had this teacher for first grade, I was like, what? No, I was so sad because I wanted him to be in this other class where most of his friends were. And I tried to control the situation, which clearly I had no business doing, and I couldn't control it. And always things turn out to be a blessing in disguise, right? And this was absolutely no different, because that first grade teacher turned out to be the best person, not only for my son, but for me as well. I learned a very valuable lesson that day. I was a parent helper. So I would go into the classroom once a week and I would help. And one day I'm in there correcting word choice. Don't really like the word correcting, especially when it's associated with first grade. So let's soften that a little bit. I was circling the words. Let's use the word circling the answers. And I noticed that the words I was looking at were far more advanced than the ones that my daughter had just 2 years before. And I thought, what's going on with this? So I asked the teacher, what's up with this? Why do they have these words? Did they change this? Did they change the curriculum? And I will never, ever, ever forget how she responded because it was so perfect. Now, these were those words, the need to know words that children have to learn in first grade in order to go on to second grade. So you had to understand things like simple, it's, is, the, and then the harder ones were like there, these, that kind of thing. So she looked at me and she said, Kim, children's minds are like sponges. I figure if I work backwards, when we are close to the end of the school year, I won't be competing with their thoughts of summer because by that time, they will know the more difficult words and they'll have a much easier time spelling the simple words. So they'll all pass. No problem. So good. So good. So what's the lesson for you? There's really 3 lessons here. I'm going to help you understand what these lessons are so that you can start to take committed action, believe in your own self, and go after your dreams. The first lesson is to tackle the hardest tasks first. So when you sit down to get something done and your mind comes up with all those reasons not to do it or why it's so hard, blah, 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 you can just say, I got this. I am fully capable of completing whatever it is. Fill in the blank. I am fully capable of writing this speech. I am fully capable of completing this business plan. I am fully capable of making 3 appointments. Always in the positive, always with I am. The words I am are incredibly powerful. The words I am are self-affirming. They harness the power of your subconscious mind and they help you to reframe your thoughts and your beliefs. So I am fully capable. I am on my way. Notice the way that these statements are phrased. It's not, I am a millionaire or I am a New York Times bestselling author. It's a little softer. It's, I am on my way. I am fully capable of becoming a millionaire. I am fully capable of being a New York Times bestselling author. Why? Because your mind is smart. And if the statement isn't true, your mind's going to go, BS. That's not true. That's not who you are. So you always want to soften it a bit by adding the words like, I'm on my way. I'm in the process. Eventually, you're going to be able to say, I am a millionaire. And your mind is no longer going to reject it. But you want to soften it first. Second step, you want to talk to yourself positively, consistently. I always talk to myself. I have friends that will look at me or my kids and they will smirk and say, you talking to yourself again? And I'm like, heck yeah. I'm cheering myself on. I'm like, you got this. You can do this. I'm going to get this right now. It's coming through. I'm going to get it. I'm going to understand it. It's all coming through to me right now. I got it. And then the third step, this is a little more involved, but it works. Think of one thing, one main thing that you want to achieve. Could be financial, could be business related, health, relationship, whatever it is. Pick one thing. And then create a positive statement about it. Record it in your own voice. Record it. Add some music if you want. And then I want you to play it over and over again to yourself. You can even speed it up because let's say you speed it up to 1.5 times normal speed, your mind's still going to grasp it. And psychologists have proven that listening to your own voice out loud forces you to slow down your thoughts and process them differently because we engage the language centers of our brain. And when you hear your own voice, you become more deliberate with your word choice. It helps you to process your emotions instead of just shoving them aside and allowing all these other thoughts to come into your mind. You don't want to be bombarded by that. So we want to record your voice. Now remember, how you write this statement is important. You want to keep it simple. You want to keep it in the present tense and something that your mind will accept. It's hard for your mind to accept statements like, I'm a multimillionaire. I'm a New York Times bestselling author. It's hard for it to accept that because your mind's going to say, if it isn't true, your mind's going to say, no, you're not. And then boom, there you go. All that negative gremlins, all that mental chatter, it's all going to start rising up again. So we're going to sidestep that. We're going to sidestep them by saying things that your mind can actually accept as reality. So if it's the million you're focused on, we're going to try a statement like, I'm so happy and grateful that I'm on my way to making millions of dollars for the work I do, or for the service I provide, or for the knowledge I share. When you soften it a bit like this, your mind cannot reject it as not true. It's positive and it's affirming. Your words have tremendous power, and they have been running like a script in the back of your mind for years. So let's use the words that are going to lift you up, the words that are going to empower you to step into the version of yourself that is fully capable, that calls upon the genius inside and knows, absolutely knows, that you can and will realize your dreams. To help gain the clarity, which is what this episode is focusing on, you're going to want to take a few steps. The first one is that you want to define what you want in specific terms and write it down. So, for example, instead of saying, I want to get fit, be more specific and say, I intend to run a marathon within the next year. Instead of, I want to be a millionaire. Get specific. I intend to become a millionaire by my 30th birthday. Clarity gives your goals direction and purpose, and you cannot create the plan of action that's going to help you achieve your goal without clearly defining that goal. Next, you want to write it down in detail. I talked about this in the last episode. Writing your goals down is important because it forces you to crystallize what exactly you hope to accomplish. It's a simple act that has a way of making your goals stick in your mind, getting your brain working on the details of making it happen. And part of that reason is simply because the act of writing engages another sense. And anytime you employ more than one sense, you solidify the information, taking it deeper into your subconscious mind. And our subconscious mind does not know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. So this very act of writing your goals and adding another sense to the process of goal imaging, it impresses the goal upon your subconscious mind, giving you a far greater chance of achieving your goal than if you were to just merely think about it. But it doesn't stop there. Repetition is key. So you want to place your goal where you're going to see it daily. This could be a vision board. It could be a note you carry in your wallet. It could be something that's on a Post-it note taped to your bathroom mirror. It could be on your computer's home screen. Got to get creative with this and find the areas that you look at each and every day and place your goal in those areas. You can actually create subliminal advertising for yourself to help you embed your goal deeper into your subconscious and influence your behavior that your goal is possible to achieve and the behavior that is going to take you towards achieving your goal. Subliminal advertising is when external forces put thoughts into your brain through visual and auditory, actually visual, auditory, and sensual cues. So your conscious brain cannot perceive these cues. They slip beyond your perception and influence your behavior. Years ago, advertisers used to use subliminal advertising at movie theaters. In between trailers at the beginning of a movie, they would flash these images of a Coke or popcorn on the screen, but it was in a nanosecond of a flash. The image would appear on the screen and your conscious mind didn't really see it, but it implanted the desire for a Coke or popcorn into your mind. So you would get up and go and buy some. Well, eventually it was taken away. I think it was considered illegal and they had to do away with it. But it's not unlike the aroma of fresh baked goods you smell when you walk into a Costco. Have you ever walked into a Costco and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I suddenly have this craving for cinnamon rolls. Even if you don't even like cinnamon rolls, all of a sudden you are hit with that bakery smell and it smells so good. And it is there because it's causing you to walk through the entire store to the very back where the bakery is so that you have to see everything that you could purchase along the way. It's subliminal. Hotels do the same thing. Have you ever walked into a nice hotel and you smell like, oh, the fresh breeze of the ocean? Or maybe it smells like a warm, inviting, woodsy cabin. It's impressing this image into your subconscious. It could be a visual, auditory, or sensory cue. And you want to do the same thing for yourself. You can write your goal on a Post-it note and put it in places that you'd least expect almost to see it. Places that you see every day, like you open up the refrigerator, but you wouldn't expect to see your goal there, and here it is in your refrigerator. Maybe you put it in your shoes. Maybe you put it in your shower. You could create a playlist that every time you hear it, it connects you deeper to your goal so that you want to take action on it. Is there a scent that you associate with money, with feeling more abundant? Take that scent and spray it on your journal. Spray it on the Post-it notes. Spray it in your home. Because each of these methods act as triggers for your mind to stay focused on the goal, not on the challenges. There are a lot of techniques that you can use as triggers for your goal. In fact, I will do an episode. I can do an entire episode on these techniques and detail them out for you and explain just why they work, because there are so many of them that are very effective. And let's face it, some tools work better for some people than others do. So I will break these down and I'll get into the details of them in an upcoming episode. Get creative with it. Get creative with these mental triggers or cues because you're going to be surprised at how much they help you. The next step is to set a deadline for achieving your goal. Deadlines are crucial to achieving goals because they help create a sense of urgency. They help you prioritize and they keep you accountable. And all of these reasons combined help keep you motivated and committed to achieving that goal. If it's a large goal, break it down into smaller parts. I'm going to take you through that process in the next episode so that you have your clear plan of action and you know just what to focus on each and every day. You have to chunk your goals down. I like to work in 90-day increments, and then I break those down into monthly, weekly, and then daily actionable steps. But you can't do that until you are clear on your goal and you understand why that goal is important to you. in order to take productive action and to move forward, you need to understand what you want and why. I touched on this in the last episode. What's motivating you? Why is this goal important and why now? What are you wanting to gain from this goal? If you've ever spent time around kids, you've probably heard them ask that question, why, a gazillion times. Kids always do this. They're naturally curious. They want to know the reason behind the what. Even from a young age, we seem to know intuitively that the motive behind an action is the most important piece of any story. So the same thing applies when we become adults and as we're trying to set our goals and achieve our goals. So take the time to get connected to your why behind your goal. You have to have that motivation. And after you've done this, then you're going to want to list out the actions that you have to take to achieve your goal. If it's starting a business, what's the first step? Do you need to get certain credentials in place? Do you need to set up your business entity? Do you need to set up a business bank account and start setting aside money to start that business? How much? Get specific with it. Do you have a business plan, a map of sorts that's going to show you how you plan on getting to where you want to be? Creating a business plan for your own self, even if you're not starting a business, but in a sense, creating this map, a plan for your own self, that helps your mind begin to focus on the steps that you need to take, which then gives you further clarity on your goals. And it helps you then to start creating the plan of action. So you want to make a list of everything that you'll have to do to achieve this goal. Next, you are going to identify any beliefs, any obstacles that may pop up for you. And they will, because we're creatures of habit. And when we start to embark on a new journey, our minds may come up with reasons why we can't do it or why it's going to be tough. But when you pay attention to those thoughts that bubble up and you ask yourself questions about them, you diffuse their energy. If you just try to ignore them, they're not going to go away. They're not going to disappear. They're going to keep popping up and they're going to keep derailing your success or prolonging it. It's kind of like an ant problem. Have you ever had an ant problem in your house and they just keep marching in one by one by one? I woke up the other morning and I walked out into the kitchen and there were all these tiny little sugar ants on my counter. And I thought, they're not leaving. They weren't going to go anywhere until I dealt with them. They just kept marching in, one by one by one. Well, it's the same thing with those pesky little thoughts. You have to deal with them, and you do that by addressing them first and then diffuse them by asking questions. Why have I not achieved this goal already? What is holding me back? What am I feeling about this goal? This is where your why is going to become so important because it's going to give you some key indicators as to what's really important to you, for you about this goal, and then what could be holding you back from a practical perspective and a mental one. When you identify the thought or the limiting belief that's holding you back, and you'll know it because it's the one that's going to carry the most emotion with it. You'll feel it. Well, when you do that, then you can focus on getting rid of it. You have to deal with it. You can't just push it aside. We all have beliefs that dictate our behavior, beliefs that could be holding us back. So you want to pay attention to those things that keep popping up for you, mentally or physically, even the things that are seemingly outside of your control. Patterns are a good indicator of your level belief in your ability to achieve your goals. I touched on this in the last episode. If you find yourself making excuses, procrastinating, or getting caught up in planning or perfection, and you're just doing all this busy work, or maybe you keep hitting the same, for me, it was hitting the same financial set point. month after month after month. You have to take a look at that because there's a strong chance that there's a limiting belief there, but it's fixable. Awareness is going to be key here because it allows you to make the changes necessary to reprogram your mind for success and move forward. That's so important. You can't create that plan unless you deal with these things first, and you won't take action and stay committed to that plan unless you deal with these things first. Finally, you want to do at least one thing every day that moves you towards your most important goal. Now, I realize that we have not created the clear plan of action yet. That's okay. You want to start taking the daily action of spending time connecting to your goal and solidifying it in your subconscious. We're programming your mind here to achieve the goal, to set you up for success. So get clear, write out your goal, set up those mental cues for yourself, set up those triggers, give yourself the visual, auditory, or sensory cues for your goals. Your own form of subliminal advertising. This not only deepens your belief that the goal is achievable, but it creates clarity. And clarity builds momentum. Momentum propels you forward. It encourages consistency and it simplifies decision making because when you're on a roll, you don't waste mental energy debating every little step. You just follow the flow, which reduces stress and it enhances your productivity. Manifestations, goal achievement, come from our state of mind. And the quickest way to manifest something is to assume the feeling of the goal already realized. And gratitude is the key that enables us to experience our goals as if they are already our reality. This is why the triggers are important. This is why those cues are so important. Because you can only create from the present moment. Because now is the only time that exists. There's no guarantee of a future, and the past is gone. So now is the only time that exists, which is why we use these cues so that our mind is accepting the goal as something that is already here and now. I know that sounds counterintuitive because you want something that's not in your current reality. But gratitude is the thing that bridges this gap between our present state of being and that which we desire, because it allows us to step into the emotional energy required to create. And when you shift your energy from chasing your goals as if they are outside of you to knowing and being grateful that they are already a part of your current reality, you will bring them to fruition. Thanks for joining me for season 1 of Shift or Get Off the Pot. I cannot believe we have already completed, about 70 episodes so far. I hope that you use the information and the processes that I have outlined in the majority of episodes during this season to not only go after, but to achieve your goals. Wherever you may be, whatever you may be currently experiencing in your life, remember that you have incredible potential. And along with it, you have the ability to make whatever dreams are sitting in your heart your reality. Enjoy your holiday season, and I'll be back with you again in the new year to kick off season 2 of Shift or Get Off the Pot.